Speak No Evil, directed by James Watkins, stars James McAvoy and Mackenzie Davis. When an American family is invited to spend the weekend at the idyllic country estate of a charming British family they befriended on vacation, what begins as a dream holiday soon warps into a snarled psychological nightmare. The very concept of this movie's existence made me initially hesitant to go see it. For those of you that don't know, this movie is a remake of a 2022 movie of the same name. I think it's really weird that Hollywood just decided to remake a movie so close after being released. Usually there's remakes of films that came out 20 or 30 years ago, but now it seems the process is speeding up. In preparation for this movie's arrival, I took it upon myself to check out the original, and I really enjoyed it while also having a bad time. I just remember the ending left this large gaping pit in my soul, and I think it's just laughable that Hollywood seems to be scared of any foreign film doing better than them. Which, speaking of, I should mention that the 2022 Speak No Evil is in Dutch. It's mainly more so an English-speaking movie. It's just annoying to see time and time again that audiences will refuse to watch anything with subtitles in them. But despite all this, what did I think of this version? I'll start with the performances, firstly with James McAvoy. He's definitely one of the highlights here, displaying a good instance of a dual performance. For the first good half of the movie, he comes across as charming, even if there's moments where he pushes it to be a little uncomfortable for people. And when we get to the second half of the movie, I think this is where the guy really shines. He's great at pulling off this truly unhinged and psychotic energy to where he comes across as threatening to a believable extent. For a lot of these scenes, he's good at being intimidating and coming across as this force to be reckoned with. This is shown even further, especially in the last 30 minutes of the movie, where for the majority of this time he goes totally over the top for the character he is, and at this point it actually works well here. He provides most of the very few laughs in the movie, and I think it's mainly just from the way he carries himself throughout these moments, and even from some of the occasional line reads. He makes the most of his performance when he's on screen, and is always enjoyable to watch. Mackenzie Davis does a pretty good job here too. For the first half of the movie, it's interesting to watch her while being cautious, still come across as being friendly as much as possible to the other couple in the movie. When it comes to moments of her being shrouded in paranoia and anxiety when the story starts to have its more darker moments, she does a good job at conveying this sense of terror and dread in moments of peril to a very believable extent, almost to the point where you can nearly sympathize with her and the situation her and her family is thrown into. Even when there's moments when we see her arguing with her on-screen husband, you still feel bad for the two of them when they get thrown into this horrible situation, mainly from her performance, as she's able to look scared enough to be engaging with you for most of the runtime. Scoot McNairy plays the other family's husband and dad, and he does an okay job here. I just personally don't like how he's portrayed in this film, despite the same character not being all that great either, but I'll delve more into that later, as I more so just want to talk about the guy's performance more than anything. This guy does a good job at being annoyingly spineless to where you're viewing him to be pathetic for most of the runtime, that you find yourself surprisingly sympathizing with him a lot less, just for how incompetent they make him here, and he did well at acting like this. I thought I'd have this review stand alone rather than having to compare the two movies together, but it's almost entirely impossible to do so by the way they handled remaking this. From the moment this movie starts, it's clear that not much work went into making this stand out or be somewhat new or unique as a remake. It's unfortunately one of these remakes that opts to just take the screenplay of the original and start rolling the camera with a batch of new actors. A scene after scene, I was graced with what I had already seen in the original movie. I know it may be early in the video to determine this, but please just watch the original movie instead. There's certainly no point in watching the both of them. Only one will be enough, and the movie's actually worth watching is the original 2022 movie. What made this aspect of the movie confusing was, despite the movie being mostly a majority of the same as the original movie, there's still these tiny changes and added scenes which are so small they seem insignificant. A lot of little things do that in this, especially one moment where we're introduced to the character that's a babysitter, and this character in the original, he has a much bigger role in it. In this movie, this character is in one scene and then we never see him again, which ultimately made him feel pointless. The biggest complaint I have about this movie is that it's clear, despite the lazy filmmaking and not saying anything new or unique, it completely misses the mark and misses the point and meaning of the original movie completely. The original movie has themes of the treatment of class system and even slight racism, and the cautionary tale of people's customs and people's overall politeness, which just gets thrown out of the fucking window in this movie entirely. While the racism thing is more subtle than anything in the original movie, that aspect is obviously completely gone here, getting rid of a lot of the substance of that original movie. And the third act is what has the most largest change in the movie, and while in context of a Hollywood thriller it works, in the context of this movie it just feels like a massive insult to the original, which I had expected going into it. This is why I thought it was a dumb idea for this movie to be made by a Hollywood studio, because if they didn't have the courage to challenge audiences with such a story, why bother to remake this specific movie in the first place? It feels incredibly saturated and sadly very safe, something the original movie reveled in not being. The main crutch of the original was to purposely frustrate the viewer by having the characters make some stupid decisions, as any character would in horror movies, but they seem to exaggerate it more than usual. But it seems to be a commentary on the idea of characters making stupid decisions, and while the characters do the same things in this remake, it feels so much more like general stereotypical tropes than being in it to make a commentary. So again, this movie feels so saturated in comparison. This movie is marketed as a horror, but personally, I think of it to be more of a thriller than anything. There's pretty much little to no scares in this. When there are scares, they're extremely cheap, but not cheap in the usual sense that they complain about on this channel, but they genuinely feel so half-assed. They're sorry excuses for jump scares, as they won't have the usual build-up or format for a jump scare. Out of nowhere, they'll just have loud bangs happen. I'm convinced these moments are just put in there to make sure the audience doesn't fucking fall asleep while they're watching. None of the moments were scary, and so much of the tension is ruined by everything being overly explained to the audience. All the subtlety is gone here, which is frustrating to watch. Overall, I didn't like this movie all that much. It's painfully mediocre, and it's just borderline insulting to not only the original movie, but Hollywood's attitude towards foreign films in general. It's so saturated and is devoid of any actual tension. It strips the concepts and questions provided by the original movie in favor of schlocky thriller antics that do, in fairness, make for a serviceable popcorn flick, but is still insulting nonetheless. There is some decent performances here that do enough to keep you engaged, but that's about it. I'm giving Speak No Evil 2.5 stars. This is an extremely lazy and uninspired remake that only really hinges on a fantastic performance by James McAvoy. It's completely safe, but so lifeless, and if you're used to the stereotypical Hollywood style of thriller, then this won't be anything new, but maybe there will be someone out there that will be able to get more out of this movie than I did.